The mic, is your mic on, sir?
Sir.
All right. Rocket.
Hello, everyone. Thank you and welcome to Columbus State University. To those who are joining us physically and to those of us who are joining us in the live stream or on the video recording afterwards. I would like to introduce what is the Video Game History Public Series that Columbus State University is sponsoring as part of the Department of History and Geography, and with the financial support of a Public Scholars and Artists grant from our Faculty Center for Teaching and Learning, which has us thinking about game development, game history, and historically inspired and historically set video games through a series of talks that will happen throughout this spring semester. Today, we have the distinct pleasure of kicking off our series by introducing Professor Christopher Cartright, who is the Senior Lecturer of English at Georgia Southern University in Armstrong campus. Professor Cartright will be speaking specifically about the FromSoftware video game Elden Ring and its interest with the humanities. To speak a little bit about Professor Cartright's background, he studied English and French at Florida State University before earning an MFA in creative writing at Florida State. He's published several poems and short stories, the most recent of which appeared in the Saturday Evening Post's Good Fiction series. He also spent the last few years researching and presenting on a range of popular media texts, including Call of Duty, the Marvel Cinematic Universe, The Walking Dead, Uncharted, Tomb Raider, and more. He is primarily interested in how political ideologies are expressed in popular media discourses. In particular, how do our most popular images and narratives justify and maintain an unjust status quo? At Georgia Southern, he teaches first-year writing, creative writing, and gender studies courses. So please welcome me in joining Professor Chris Cartright.
Everyone, I really appreciated the invite, and okay, I'll just get started. Let's see, what did I say? Okay, so before we talk about anything like scholarly or interesting or uplifting, how many of y'all have played Elden Ring? Okay, and how many of y'all are still playing Elden Ring? Okay.
Although the DLC is going to be coming out soon.
Yes. I love how we got one picture about the DLC, and I've now watched about 45 minutes of content somehow off of that one image. So, you know, we don't have a problem or anything. So even if you haven't played Elden Ring, you may have heard of it. It is a pretty popular game. And that's really what interests me about it more, is not so much the game, which I happen to enjoy quite a bit, but the window that it provides into contemporary media and politics, and the window it provides into kind of the operations of global culture. So a lot of what I talk about today will be grounded in Elden Ring as an example, but I hope it'll become clear how it's applicable to a wide array of popular media. So I want to talk about what it is and what it can tell us. And I also want to talk a little bit about how students in the humanities and social sciences might approach popular media as you kind of enter this field, and as you think about what the next few decades of your fields will look like. I hope that this talk will encourage you to perhaps pay closer attention to popular media and the linkages into your own interests or academic interests. I should apologize kind of in advance. I'm normally a script guy. I like to have like 100 slides, and I have a very detailed script, and I read it exactly. And I've got to get out of that. So I'm going to try to speak extemporaneously and just have some flavor images going at the same time. So just give me a couple of minutes of like awkward back and forth before I kind of find my rhythm. All right. So let's see. The basic argument is that Elden Ring and the Souls genre more generally gives us a really rich field of analysis for the humanities and social sciences. And you're probably aware that our fields are under some external pressure, social and political pressure, to justify what we contribute to the university and to kind of justify our existence, at least for us in English. I think history has a little bit of a better position to argue from. And so now more than ever, we need to be thinking about opportunities to bring our work to a broader public. And so that's what I really like about media studies, what I like about studying popular media, even if I don't enjoy it, even if it's not, what I seek out, is that as soon as you say Pirates of the Caribbean, people know what it is. And so when you want to talk about something called globalization, or you want to talk about something like the history of colonialism, if you give people, it doesn't matter that it's an inaccurate image, it doesn't matter that it's a narrative, but it's a picture, it's a starting point. So we can study games like Elden Ring as a text, and I'll talk about some of its textual features. But what I'm more interested in is how the text provides these representations of real social relations. So how, even as a fictional text, a dark fantasy video game where you're blasting people with Harry Potter spells, it's still representing politics, religion, culture, marginalization, gender, all of the things, all of the issues and ideas that shape contemporary politics are involved in these stories, in these texts. And so we can, with a particular approach, we can understand these texts as sites of political debate and even sites of political action. So what is Elden Ring? It's an action adventure, which means that there's some amount of skill involved or required for the game. Role-playing video game. So role-playing really just means that I'm able to create some type of character and express my individuality with the weapons, the skills that I choose, the armor that I choose to wear. It's the genre that really puts the player, that asks players to invest their identity into the text and to project their identity into the text. Throughout the game, you explore the world, you fight enemies, you interact with characters, and different choices you can make throughout the game allow you to achieve one of 6 different endings. And those endings themselves are kind of commentaries on the meaning of the story that you've experienced. So it's a pretty random game, like what makes this one special? Why did it become as popular as it did? Why did it sell, for example, 20 million copies in a 10-month period, which is really, those are great numbers. Its initial sales trajectory was similar to Grand Theft Auto 5, which is the highest grossing piece of media of all time. Elden Ring almost certainly isn't going to achieve anything like that, but that's very, very good for a new intellectual property. So it didn't come out of nowhere. It was developed by a Japanese development firm called FromSoftware. And how many of y'all have heard of the Dark Souls games? I think several, right? Okay, for those on Zoom, basically, I think 90% of the people in the room raise their hands. So I won't go too much into it, but the Souls games are a particular modern genre that we can find the roots of Souls games going way back. But the idea of that you're managing your stamina, that you have a relatively limited amount of weapons or ability to use items before you have to strategically kind of retreat. The genre is also kind of defined by a heavy atmospheric, very heavy atmosphere, and an emphasis on atmospherics. It also features very ambiguous narratives. That's one of the core things that makes a Souls game a Souls game, is that they ask you to figure out what's happening, and they often reject or subvert common gameplay tropes that will kind of take your hand and say, for example, they don't have like a compass. They won't tell you, they won't mark a location on a map for you. In fact, Elden Ring is the first one of these games with a map. So it's also kind of an interesting or special game because the lore of the game, or the fictional mythology or history that the game is grounded in, was written by the author George R.R. Martin. You've probably heard his name in relation to the Game of Thrones or House of the Dragon shows on HBO. So he didn't write the dialogue of the game, right? He didn't develop the game. Several years before we learned anything about it, this is according to an interview he did with Stephen Colbert, he was asked to write this backstory, which he says is about 5,000 years before, some kind of unknown length of time before the action of the game. So if you've seen House of the Dragon or Game of Thrones, then and played Elden Ring, you would, I think, be able to see certain connections. For example, the emphasis on a political family and political drama. And of course, you know, he loves his incest and he loves his taboo stuff. So there's a lot of little markers that you're going, that's George. I think that's George, right? So together, those two very profitable and very popular formulas merge with Elden Ring. And so it is one of the most critically acclaimed games ever. It's one of the highest reviewed games that's ever, you know, been released. And in reviews, the biggest, reviewing outlets refer to it as a game of the decade and as a once in a generation title. So we can look at this not as something that is, this isn't a small game with a small audience that's not very critically well known. This is an industry standard. And so as we understand how it works and what it does, we can assume that other developers are kind of pursuing this success and are going to follow this model. So my background, my approach to Elden Ring is really less as a fan or less in terms of what I think it does well or even a sense of its artistic merit, and more so I'm interested in how this very popular story, how this very popular set of narratives and images represents modern social relations. Okay, I mean, I shouldn't pretend that I'm not like a huge fan. I put 500 hours into the game. I've played every Souls game since the beginning of the pandemic, some of them multiple times. And, I'm basically an evangelist. So I have to really stop myself from, just going off script and asking you about how far you got in Elden Ring. But we'll save that for later. And I would love to give you some tips if you're looking for them. I'll probably give you tips even if you don't ask for them, to be honest. So with this kind of approach in mind, as someone with a background in creative writing, my interest in popular media is to understand what kinds of stories people are making and how they're representing the world that we live in. And part of that is so that I can understand what kind of story I want to tell and how my work is going to fit in, my work as an artist is going to fit into that landscape. I have a few kind of theoretical or methodological kind of touchstones that I'll talk about a little bit that kind of guide my approach to these media. So I tend to start from a basis in information literacy and the principle of liberal education, which gives us this kind of normative foundation around this idea that education should equip individuals to use information to achieve their aims and to, in some form or fashion, better the world, okay? So I kind of come at the study of media from the assumption that we're not just trying to know what things are, we're trying to use this knowledge to actually improve our lives. Coming from English, we study and tend to focus on critical theory, which is a very wide range of lines of inquiry that are, centered on the idea that any theory or analysis should work to liberate humanity from forms of oppression. From here, I go to intersectional feminism, and which gives us the idea that our experiences of the world and really our identities are not simply individual experiences or somehow, natural social formations, but they're systems or structures of power. Unfortunately, intersectionality is, I think, very widely misunderstood. And many people will tell you that intersectionality is about identity and intersectionality is about how we're all different. Well, Patricia Hill Collins, who was one of the people who developed the idea, this is what she says. Rather than thinking of race, class, and gender as personal identities, We need to look at them as social constructs specifically designed to maintain power for some at the expense of others. In other words, race, class, and gender are systems of power, structural ways of articulating the world, end quote. So if you ask someone who practices intersectional feminist analysis, they will very likely tell you or ask you to think maybe a little bit less about race and identity and a little bit more about racism and social relations and social formations. So it's kind of a misunderstanding of intersectionality that's all about identity. It understands identity in terms of material social relations. And then the last kind of touchstone that I draw on is what's called critical discourse analysis, which is another kind of array of methods that people use to, quote, investigate critically social inequality as it expressed, signaled, constituted, legitimized, and so on by language and discourse. So altogether, I take the perspective that media representations, that the media shapes social relations through representation of those relations. So the experience, the event 9/11 occurs, and then every single story we tell about that event after the fact represents the event and represents the event and shapes the way we understand and respond to it. So all of that together is kind of just to give you a little bit of a touchstone, kind of where I'm coming from in my approach to media. It's not that Elden Ring's popular. It's not even because I like it. It's because it gives us a window into how popular media shapes the cultural discourses that create our politics. Okay, so that's kind of the boring stuff. Thank you for getting through that with me. Let's talk about Elden Ring. So I've got a few different angles I can hit, and I'm going to try to, instead of picking the ones that I think matter, I'm going to try to give you all a bit of a choice of where we start, okay? So I want to start by talking about Elden Ring as a global media text, okay? So let's think about this game just as a text, as a piece of media. I can talk a little bit about the narrative, so the story. I can talk a little bit about the aesthetics or style, or I can talk about the gameplay mechanics like multiplayer and competitive play. Any preference? Narrative, style, gameplay, where should we start?
I'm very interested in what you have to say about the narrative, especially with certain peoples presented in the narrative.
Okay, I would love that. Is there a particular group that you're?
The Albinarics.
Okay, that's one of my bullet points. Okay, great, thank you. So Elden Ring is, think about Game of Thrones, you basically have, no, it's not true. You're entering the world after the Shattering, which is this great war that's occurring between these demigods. And all these demigods are the children of Queen Marika. And this is actually a really interesting revision of, I believe, in Irish mythology of the Tuatha De Danann. I'm so sorry. That's all wrong. But which is a story about Danann, who is the mother of these demigods who kind of are at war. So George R.R. Martin immediately is pulling from an established mythology to structure these relationships. So you are a tarnished who has basically been rejected by America's Golden Order, and now you're being brought back to the lands between, and you're being asked to restore the Elden Ring. What the hell is an Elden Ring? What's the Greater Wealth? Right? You don't know what these things are. It's a lot of proper nouns, like really bad fantasy. Just like, oh, the Golden Order in America, and you're like, who? So it's a lot of that at the beginning, but you kind of slowly learn about the world as you play, and you realize that this Golden Order that you're supposed to be restoring is maybe not quite what it seems. For example, you start to learn about this race of people called the Albinarics, who are these homunculi, depending on who you ask, who are kind of been created through alchemy and but they are seen as being, they're not touched by grace. They're outside of the grace of the Elden Ring or the grace of the Greater Will, the Golden Order, which are all kind of related elements of the narrative. And so as you encounter Albinorics and Misbegotten or Omen, who are children who are born with horns and feathers and are marginalized, basically forced to live in the sewers under the royal capital, you're slowly realizing that the world isn't what it seems, that the Golden Order is not this like wonderful, gilded thing, but is possibly an alien, some kind of outer god that is, probably not as great as you might think. And so through this narrative, you can probably already see a lot of ways that this narrative is representing really important elements of our social relations today. The golden lineage of America and the demigods, they clearly, in my view, represent the elites. I do think that there are ideas about capitalism that are being kind of worked out in this narrative, but I would caution us not to kind of closely think that the kind of feudal, royal, family thing that's what he's saying about capitalism. But I think that it makes very much sense to understand these major players as the elites of the world who are responsible for the state, the shattering, what it's called. The Golden Order and their Royal Knights of Lindell, who marginalized groups like the Albinorics. They have imagery that's very evocative of the Crusades, or really of medieval kind of representations of the Crusades. And they tell stories about racial and religious intolerance and marginalization. So that's part of it. There's also this kind of secret about America. I'm sorry for the spoiler here, but you find out deep into the game that America is Radigan. Now, what that means is kind of unclear, but Radigan is this champion. America is this goddess. And at a certain point, you realize that these are not different people. These are somehow the same person. Either they always have been, or they became the same person. Through some process. Again, the game is very much not trying to tell you what's happening. I can't stress enough that this game doesn't really want you to know what's happening. It wants you to feel, a particular way, and it kind of demands that you figure out the timeline. So, for example, we really don't know what order certain things happen. Things that are very crucial to the story, we just don't know what happened before what. So with America and Radigan, the reason I bring them up is because they represent one of several characters that reflect a kind of trans identity. Characters who represent who either have dual identities, where people know them in two different ways as two different genders, or some kind of evocation of that. So throughout the narrative of the game, with its kind of broad political conflict, its representation of the effects of this war, its different characters and their relationships and their identities, through all of this, it is, in my view, engaging very directly with some of the most sensitive or important political debates that we're having, in the United States, of course, but in the West and globally more broadly. Another quick thing I'll say about the narrative is that it works. Clearly, it engages with you as a hero. It asks you to be a hero. You're the Tarnished, rise and become the Elden Lord. But because you're slowly learning that the golden lineage isn't quite what it seems, because you have the option to inherit the frenzied flame. Again, sorry, a lot of proper nouns, but you can inherit the frenzied flame and let chaos take the world. It is working within this heroic narrative structure, but it's clearly, doing it very similar to what we see in George R. R. Martin's other work. It's clearly subverting it in kind of familiar postmodern ways. The other element that I want to point out is that this is yet another one of the most popular narratives right now that's an apocalyptic story. And when I started studying popular media, I was struck by how much this theme of decay, the idea that, the world, we're screwed and there's nothing you can do, and people are kind of fighting to take care of themselves and the people they love in a world that is fundamentally broken. Walking Dead comes to mind, Last of Us, right? I mean, it's you can't throw a stick, you can't, swing your arm without hitting an apocalyptic story. And Elden Ring is really right there. There is the scarlet rot that's destroying the world. There is the death root, which is expanding under the continents and creating those who live in death. And the Elden Ring is shattered, and Radigan seeks to repair it. But America is the one who shattered it. Was not. So it's very much about a world whose leaders have failed, and a world that is kind of just an order, a social order, golden order that is dissolving, that has to be replaced. Key part of the game, the story, is the gameplay, which is that requirement that you choose how this will end. If you play it naturally and you don't look up guides and you just kind of go through the game, you probably will still have one or two options at the end. It's, I would say, relatively difficult to not have at least two endings by the time you get there. You can get to the end and have six options, but by the time you get to the end of the game, if you've done most of the kind of stuff on the main path, you'll probably have two endings to choose from. So as a narrative, not only does it present all of these elements I've discussed, but it demands that you conclude that narrative by choosing what's going to happen. Some of the endings restore the golden order. I would call those more conservative endings. I think they reflect more conservative politics. They restore America's golden order because while it might be imperfect, it is order. It is going to resolve the chaos of the world. There are more kind of reformist endings. You'll meet this man named Goldmask who never speaks. And if you do some really random, stupid Dark Souls stuff, he'll give you this mending rune of order, which, the way I understand it, it restores the golden order, it restores the Elden Ring by expanding it in such a way that the Misbegotten, the Albinorics, and these kind of marginalized races are now able to be touched by grace or what have you. And I'm realizing how bad it is that a recording of this exists, because there are some very deep Elden Ring fans who will get really mad when they hear this theory, because ultimately it's kind of how I'm piecing together the narrative, and there's wide disagreement about what it means. But I generally think that there are kind of restorative or more conservative endings, or more reformist endings, and then there are a couple of endings that entirely subvert the golden order, where you elevate those who live in death, who are enemies of the golden order, and they take over. Or the Age of Stars, which is very ambiguous about whether you're abandoning the world or you're actually destroying it. But either way, it's going to be long, it's going to be cold, it's going to be dark. But my girl Ronnie said we should do it, so I like her, so that's what we did. Okay. But that narrative is demanding that the player choose the meaning of these events. So I wanted to ask y'all, are there games, movies, shows, popular media that you're enjoying right now where you see thematic overlaps with Elden Ring? Can you think of media that you're engaging with today that is exploring or representing those same kinds of social relations, stories about elites and apocalypse, stories about marginalization and reform? Where else are you seeing those stories?
Death Stranding.
Death Stranding, okay. Can you talk about which themes, really seem to overlap?
Yeah, the as far as as far as Kojima predicting something again.
Okay.
It came out right before the pandemic.
Right.
So it's a post-apocalyptic story again, and it deals with
There's
how.
there's some kind of disease or apocalyptic scenario that's kind of, yeah.
Yeah, he said that he had to rewrite Death Stranding too, because he didn't want to like predict.
Right. And, Death Stranding's an interesting game too, because it's so much about social isolation and connection.
Yeah.
You kind of walk in these really empty landscapes, but the purpose of your journey is to connect these different nodes. And as you move through the landscape and connect nodes, other players' constructions will start to appear in your world. And I really like Death Stranding. It's like, I'll say it cured my depression, but like it really was like kind of a life-affirming game for me. Because you're just kind of walking and delivering packages. It's like mail delivery sim, but it's much more.
And the social aspect that you mentioned, like turning likes into a commodity in
Yes,
the game is,
you can like other players' items, and that will give them like a boost of experience, that kind of thing. And actually, I spent a lot of time about Elden Ring and the Dark Souls games. They have something similar. These kind of often asynchronous multiplayer mechanics that allow you to experience the world with others. So whenever you die, you leave a red phantom. So you leave like a red outline of yourself, and you play the last few seconds before you die. And so, you walk into a room and you see bloodstains all over the floor, and you're like, oh, Jesus Christ. And you click on them and you see someone just flying through the air and, something horrible is happening to them. We come back when I'm 20 levels up. So there's a lot of those kind of elements that many games are playing with. Okay, so themes of isolation, themes of apocalypse, others. Go ahead.
So I know that FromSoft takes a lot of inspiration from it. I recently finished Berserk.
Yes.
And I knew that there were
It's a popular Japanese manga that started in the 80s and has been going on for like 30 years or so.
And I knew that there were a lot of overlaps because they take a lot of inspiration from it, but I was very surprised to see how America and the Golden Order and all of that can almost directly sort of be parallel to the God Hand in a more cynical reading of the God Hand and the Apostles, where they literally are an elite that prey upon the people beneath.
Sure. And that require the suffering of others to have their strength to persist. Yeah. Yeah, that's a really good point. Any other the themes I discussed with Elden Ring, any other games or stories that come to mind? Go ahead.
Stray.
Stray, okay, the cat game.
Yes.
Okay, what's the relationship?
Because you know how you start off in the slums, and it's got that group of robots that they seem cast out from everyone else. And as you progress, you see more and more that are like you don't ever see people, but like you see a more like a bigger society,
Right.
But they cast out everyone in the slums, and I mean it's not a big overlapping thing, but it made me think of that.
Well, I mean, the idea of being rejected, cast out, that's all over Elden Ring. And that's really all over the FromSoft games. So I think, when I ask you for these connections, I'm asking you for these to kind of encourage you to see how some of the most interesting political issues, most important political issues that are being debated are present in our most popular media. They're being represented, they're being engaged with indirectly and usually aesthetically, not necessarily in kind of a logical fashion, but people are expressing how they feel about these issues through the ways they represent them. And so I really want to hammer the idea that as students, you don't have to pick the line of inquiry that your professors are kind of naturally kind of pull you toward, because those were the issues or those were the texts or whatever that were really relevant when they kind of came into the field and that kind of shaped their career. You should kind of do what your professors did but find that for yourself. If you're interested in social inequality as a topic and you love games, why the hell shouldn't you study how social inequality is represented in games, right? So I encourage you to kind of look for those connections and see kind of your way into them. Let's see. So I'll jump to talking a little bit about the games in terms of their multiplayer and community aspects, so I can get a little bit into how the game as a global media text produces an international discourse community. So Elden Ring exists as a game, but it has these aspects of how the text work require people to communicate about it. So Dr. Lynch mentioned that he played Demon Souls way back in the day, right? Demon Souls was the first of this Souls type game. Souls games are named after Demon Souls, really. And in Demon Souls, you could get invaded by another player and not know that there was a human being in your world. Like
That was actually my experience, Professor Cartwright, is that I had played the game originally and didn't even realize at first that there was this multiplayer element until somebody entered my game and I thought, oh, well, this is interesting. And they immediately killed me. And that's part of that sort of exploration, that lack of explanation.
Right.
That's so interesting as part of it.
And when you get invaded for the first time in these games, it's like a crushing feeling. You know, you're just like, who is that? Like, what
And also, why have they done this?
What have I done to them? I have to say, like, I have to admit that I am now an invader. Like, I'm now the kind of person.
Oh, so you're one of those people.
I'm one of those people. I have become one of those people who gets my primary enjoyment from the game is going into other people's worlds and dueling them. And so there's this asynchronous stuff. You can leave messages. So you go to a cliff and you say, try jumping down. You can mess with people. The Demon Souls created this whole community, not the developers, but this happened just around the game. This whole community of people who were like, what the hell is happening? And they put together these really big wikis that kind of walk you through it. Really, there are other people who kind of who went into the code to figure out, why can I stagger an opponent with this axe but not that axe? Oh, because it's a hidden poise value. So immediately when these games came out, they kind of created a community of people who were just trying to get through the game and just trying to figure out what the hell is going on. This is interesting, but they're very difficult to beat without at least a little bit of, so you kind of need like 5 points of advice to really get through one of these games on your own. The first one of these. Then you get the formula and it kind of becomes hard to understand why other people struggle with it. But that first time through one of these games, you absolutely need a little community to help you out.
I was curious, this invasion feature, if that's what it's called.
Yes.
Is that something you get to choose, or is it
You do
inherent?
not get to opt in.
Oh my god.
In Elden Ring, you can opt in, but if you're playing cooperatively, as soon as you get help from a friend, you must be open to invasions. You cannot get help from a friend without being open to invasions. And there are people who, and in invader culture, I'm just gonna tell you about
Some
that.
might call it malicious culture, Professor Cartwright.
And so I'm like one of those like I don't want to say good invader because there's no such thing, but I pretend to be honorable. So what I try to do is I go into a world, I always wave, and then I allow the player to initiate combat. So I wave, I twirl in a circle, I might sit down so that they can go to a bonfire somewhere, they're not going to lose all their materials, and then I ask to duel them. Okay. This is frowned upon by other members of the community who say, kill them. Like, go kill them. And there are invaders. So there's a practice called ganking, which is where people who get invaded a bunch, they go, you know what? No, not today. And they get 2 of their friends and they find a really good position and they lure invaders. And the way they enjoy the games that they make gank squads and they just 3 people, you go into a world and I wave, I bow, I wait, and then 3 giant comets, are flying toward me, and there's just, blood and lightning, and all these huge area of effect attacks just kind of pouring down at me from like a really disadvantageous position, and that's getting ganked, right? And so there are invaders who have somehow convinced themselves that the real problem with the game isn't mean invaders, but is actually evil gankers. Like, can you imagine? How could you ruin someone's attempt to murder you by getting a team of your friends? Like, isn't that so dishonorable? So I use those anecdotes just to set up that what started as a community of people who were like, what the hell is happening in this game, has now become this complex community lore hunters, people who go into the development files and figure out cut content and try to figure out more of the story that way. There are co-op helpers, kind of Sherpas, which is what I've done for one of my friends. I played the entire game with him, protected him from invaders, and walked him through exactly what to do so that he could understand these games. I did it with Dark Souls 3 and Bloodborne, and then when Elden Ring came out, we stopped playing together because he was off on his own. He was, he was ready, right?
And Professor Cartwright, if I can say, right, like this is how some people become engaged with FromSoft's games, right? And
Yes.
I actually think you were asking about
Many people-
comparisons with other games, right? I think about the game that came out, 7-8 years ago at this point, of Journey, right?
Yes.
Of kind of being, again, this sort of quiet narrative that you don't necessarily know what's happening, but you kind of get that Sherpa experience of going through the game with somebody else very often to
And in
guide you.
Journey, other people will kind of come into your game. It doesn't tell you don't know that they're another player until
Yeah.
you have to kind of figure that out for yourself. And they can help you. They can show you kind of where to go
Yeah.
on this journey that's
Yeah.
kind of big.
And we won't ruin, of course, the game, but on the other side, right, then you can play that role for someone else. And so it becomes this sort of this meta text almost, right? Like in the whole process, which I think is also interesting, right? And it makes me wonder in some cases if From were thinking about, some of those things with
Some of Takazaki's comments kind of are about an insistence on players finding the way that they want to engage with the game.
Mhm.
And this kind of idea that a resistance to accessibility things that I think would make sense and I don't think would have any negative impact on the game, but that's often argued from the perspective that, well, I want people to be able to make their experience, but also a desire for people to have a kind of communal experience. So in spite of all the negative feedback they got, they haven't changed the invasion system. All they did was they made it so that you can't get invaded if you're on your own. That was the one concession they made. But someone can still come into your world and wreck you from across the map. That's it. If you want to play one of these games, that's how it works, right?
I'm sorry, but you said when you're on your own, what's that mean?
So in Elden Ring, if you don't invite someone to play with you, like if you're not cooperating, you won't get invaded.
So there is a sort of an option.
Yes, only for Elden Ring, where their previous games, doesn't matter. If you're online,
well, I was gonna say, I think you can play offline, right? Like,
yes,
and
that's true.
and that was interesting because that was my experience with Demon Souls. I was originally playing Demon Souls in a place where I actually, it's very weird, but I couldn't bring my PlayStation 3 online at the time. And so I played a big chunk of that game without realizing that there was this entire other aspect of, receiving notes from players and the invasion until I then had that
So let me
experience
say
where I
about
got
that choice,
crushed.
right? Because you're not online and you're not getting, just even the ghosts of players going somewhere to tell you, oh shit, I can go there, or someone dying to tell you, don't rush in. You kind of have to trade off. You kind of lose something to opt out. Whereas opposed to any other game where you switch, right? But in Elden Ring, if you're gonna be in the community, you have to be able to be invaded. If you're gonna play with others, you have to be willing to compete. Go ahead.
Well, I just had a quick question, sort of, you mentioned accessibility.
Yes.
We're sort of kind of dancing around the elephant in the room. The game is very hard. So that's one of the things it's known for is like the get good.
Yes.
Which doesn't necessarily mean get your skills better or like get, your twitch reflex better, but better.
It means you
equipment.
kind of learn. Yeah.
Right, yeah, so I'm just curious as to like, this could be an entire lecture on itself.
I know. And I mean, it's amazing how much of my talk I haven't got to.
So
Because there's so much. But yeah.
like books and movies don't require you to get good to enjoy the entire thing. In
Sure.
games, like there's a definitive place that you can't get past and you're not gonna be able to.
You can't hit the button with this kind of timing, in many games, not just Elden Ring, but many games. You can't hit a certain timing, there's gonna be a certain window of ability that's demanded of you to engage. Elden Ring and these types of games have, been often used as an example for why you don't need accessibility, which I think is kind of hilarious because they're super difficult, but people will say, well, because you can level up and because you can find this item, then, and those things can make the game massively, there are certain, play a mage, okay? If you're having a hard time with Elden, play a mage. Because you'll be blasting people like Goku from 30 feet away, and the game is much easier that way. But others would say, well, if you're taking away my choice of what build I can play in order for me to be able to beat this, that's not accessibility. That you're still kind of demanding that I play it on my terms. So there's a lot that we can say, and I'm kind of ignoring all the hands that are coming up around the accessibility thing just because I have 10 minutes left. So I'm just going to pretend I don't see your hands coming up. But there's, when you think about that accessibility thing with the game, we should think about its kind of inherent difficulty. We should think about the kind of conventions of accessibility options, right? What options we get for accessibility, those are conventions that are kind of forming currently, where game developers are deciding, I'm going to make an auto dodge. That's one way to solve the accessibility problem, right? Another way to solve it is to give you a lever and you can turn it to what's comfortable. Elden Ring, it's kind of, I would personally, I'm critical of Elden Ring on this. I think they should definitely have, I don't think that difficulty settings.
Oh, here we go, internet. Here we go, internet.
I don't think difficulty settings are always the best way to do accessibility, but I do think that as soon as you demand people play a game in a particular way, you are inherently excluding some people from that experience. And so I think every artist, every creator has to make that choice about who they're willing to exclude. And I think they kind of give people a little bit of too much room to weasel out of that moral question. Just say that you're not going to make this game playable by people who are deaf. That's not, you don't want to say that, you don't are comfortable saying that, then maybe you should find a way, right? So I think that we might need to reframe that conversation away from should we have it or not. It's your game, make it how you want. But when you do that, this is what happens. When you make this choice, when you make it so that you have to be invaded to play the game, and everyone who doesn't want to get teabagged by a 14-year-old in Norway isn't going to play online, and they're going to lose out on all of those experiences, right? Is that how, if you want to make that choice, make that choice. But I hope that makes sense, but that it is the creator's choice, and they're responsible for the impact of those choices. So the difficulty drive really kind of helped produce the community. The community has kind of created this kind of honor culture and this really interesting debates in the community about what is honorable or what people call maidenless behavior. And I guess I'll use that as a way to transition into my last point, which is that Elden Ring, we saw how it's a text, as global text, and its narrative, style, gameplay, all of that are elements of the text to consider. We talked then about it as a discourse community. All those textual elements create avenues for audiences, not just to engage with the text, but the requirements for the audience to engage with one another. You have to read messages sometimes. You have to look at what the ghost does. And there are actually elements of previous games where a boss in the game will be played by another player. So there are parts of the game that would actually require that you have PvP or multiplayer competitively to pass through. In Elden Ring, they have fewer of those kind of choke points that force you to play with others, but they remain a kind of part of the game. The last thing I want to talk about is how Elden Ring is a global media text that produces a discourse community, provides a site where we can debate the present and the future. So I'll just sketch out a couple of the issues that are being kind of debated in the fandom. Accessibility and inclusion. That is perhaps the most dominant conversation in the Souls fandom that Elden Ring is part of, is that question of, are these games too hard? How should we respond to the difficulty? And And what is the, generally it kind of comes down to what is the responsibility of developers to be inclusive? And clearly you can see how this becomes become culture war cudgels where sides generally form very strongly in ways that, in my view, I think let the developer off the hook a little bit and don't really engage with the much more complex ethical questions around art that they could, where they just become, should it have a difficulty slider or not? But that's a big part of the conversation is accessibility and inclusion. Another big debate around the fandom is about representation and inclusion. So when I was one of the couple people who, or several people who opened the game, looked at the character creation, and looked at the hairstyles, and was just like, God damn it. Because ever since I've been playing Tony Hawk Pro Skater 1, there are 3 African American hairstyles. There's a weird afro that doesn't really, we never choose that. Okay. There's a really chunky braids that don't really, they're not, and you look through the Anglo-European or Asian hairstyles, and it's just, they're just textured and so much better. And there's just more, there's 15 European hairstyles and 3 African hairstyles. Okay, that's a difference. So that's been another kind of area of debate. And once again, where hard culture war lines tend to be, they should never have, no Black people existed in Europe. It's like Europe, whatever. So, who cares? It's just the developers. And other people are saying, what's the effect of this? It's a fantasy world. And often those conversations are just shooting right past each other. Another interesting kind of conflict I see in the fandom has to do with this idea of toxicity and a kind of celebration of being the worst possible person. Again, as an invader or a red, hosts are the players, blues are people who might come and help the player. Orange players or sun bros, maybe that's the term from Dark Souls, are people who are maybe going to be orange, and they're like strangers who might come and help you. And then reds are invaders, and if you see a red, it's like kill them on sight. Okay, and within that, all those interactions and all around this idea of honor, there is a contingent of people who are what they want from the game, or what they want to express through the game is chaos and toxicity. I'm in a Facebook group called Elden Ring Toxic Community, and it has been just a really wonderful and depressing, window into the psyche, again, probably of like teenage boys, North America and Europe primarily. But that's what they want. That's what they want to express, is they want a space to be the worst versions of themselves. So if there's items that are like dung heap, there's an item called like dung heap or something like that. And, I've dueled many people. I walk in, I wave, I bow. They snipe me with, while in my bowing animation, they kind of time it. They're like, this idiot bowed. Like, huge mistake, half your health, kill you. And they come and they squat over your body while it disappears and throw dung. It's like, so that is a culture. That is a part of the discourse community that celebrates that. And the same game has one of the most inclusive LGBTQ friendly communities, sub-communities within that, where many trans and queer gamers talk about their experiences playing these games, how they allow them to express gender nonconformity, gender fluidity in these spaces. There are several characters who I hesitate to call them trans because I think that's a kind of modern conception of gender, but that may or may not work in a fantasy world. But these are characters who clearly express fluid or trans gender identities. And so there are players who take that art, take those stories, cosplay them and embody them to create a high. So the other Facebook group I'm in is called Elden Ring LGBTQ Friends or something like that. And I just love having those 2 feeds in my Facebook, competing with one another. So I guess the last thing I'll say in terms of the groups is through the memes around games especially and the interpretations of the endings, we see kind of an expression of reformist, revolutionist, and doomerist ideas. There are people who kind of take the chaos ending as a kind of celebration of letting go of the world. It's doomed, we're effed. Like, that is the way things are. That's how we should understand the political moment. And they use the imagery of the game to kind of express that. There are others who write long essays about the plight of the Albanurics and make generally liberal arguments, philosophically liberal arguments about the way that the Golden Order might be reformed. There are very few people who are like, the Golden Order is amazing, but there are groups that in these games and others will cosplay as crusaders and, in ways that overlap very closely with Nazi and other like white supremacist online groups and memes. They'll kind of cosplay those memes in Elden Ring, in these games, there's a certain kind of crusader-like, outfit, and their name will be Deus Vult, and, I killed a guy named Nazi N3ZI, and killing him was probably one of the satisfying parts of playing the game. But people are cosplaying and remixing their ideologies into and expressing their political views about the real world using these images. So I know I'm a little over time. I'm just going to close with this. Why should we study media? Just this week, Governor Ron DeSantis took over, used the power of the state to retaliate against Disney, citing their media, their political activity, and the woke indoctrination that's happening, according to DeSantis. Here in Georgia, legislators are debating laws that would, among other things, exclude certain books from library shelves, based on the content. When I look at those news stories, it tells me that at this particular moment, now more than ever, we need clear, evidence-based understandings of what media actually contains, what our media representations are actually doing and saying. There's a big knowledge gap right now, where a lot of people with power, a lot of people with a platform are talking about media, and they're reaching for information, and there's really nothing there. And that's where I see scholars in the humanities and social sciences. If there's ever been a time for us to write about video games, to write about Disney movies, now is the time, because people on CNN are trying to talk about these things, are making arguments that are going to impact legislation, that impacts our media, in an information vacuum. Okay? So students of the humanities and social sciences have the best opportunity to lead future conversations about media by applying what you're studying to the text that you care about and enjoy the most. Thank you. I'll leave it there in terms of the formal talk, but I'll be hanging out for a while, and I'd love to talk more to anybody who wants to. Yes,
Great.
thank
Thank you very much. I'll thank all of you for attending today on behalf of Columbus State University and the Department of History and Geography. And a final thing that I'll sort of mention is that this, of course, is the first of a series of talks and a growing interest that we have here at Columbus State related to the humanities, video games, video game development, and video game studies more broadly. And so if you are on the internet and are watching this video and interested in the types of things that Professor Cartright spoke about today, this is going to be an increased focus here at our institution. And my hope is that you will reach out to us to engage with us in future events that we will have and to consider Columbus State as an option for you. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Still live? Can I start swearing?
Yeah, we can end things there.
Yeah.
We have maybe a few more